Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And like always, we have a very interesting guest today. It is none other than Paul Resnik. And for those of you who are not familiar with the name, he is a pioneer in investment, financial space, and particularly in the product management side. And one of those very few people who understand investment and psychology of people. You will discover it hopefully in the conversation. And I'm saying hopefully, perhaps it will depend on how I'll get him to talk because when you talk to somebody with such a wealth of knowledge, if something is shortcoming, it could well be on my asking. So, with that, and also I just want to add one more thing to this that Paul is one of those very few people who have been the old gods of the finance world and aggressive advocate for tokenization today, which is very, very few people, of course. And most important thing is that we will you will discover as well in the conversation that people half his age or experience, unfortunately today, perhaps in the financial world, do not understand tokenization. So that's what makes it so much more special to have this conversation with Paul Resnik. And Paul, once again, welcome to Future Fast. Thank you so much for making time to be here with me, and despite this different time zones that we both share.
Jojo, it is a delight to be with you. And as you know, I live in the future. I've told you before, I'm five and a
Yes,
half hours
you're
ahead.
5.5 hours ahead of where I am. So you're in future for me. So wonderful. So it actually sets the right context for the podcast as well, that I'm talking to the future as well. So, Paul, can we start with your journey? I know you've had a huge journey, but if you can put it in a capsule to us from where you start
Gosh,
and how it
yeah.
evolved to where you are today.
So if I can simplify, I've been very fortunate. Opportunity has followed me all my life. I grew up in England and migrated to Australia when I was 16. I found myself a job in a factory and I didn't enjoy it very much. I was the toilet cleaner for the first few weeks, and I found a job. I was very lucky. I got myself a jacket and a tie. This was 1970, and I turned up at this beautiful building in Sydney, an Art Deco building. And the man, when I went into the office, looked up to me and said, "I see you're from England. Do you play fullback?" And I had learned very early that it's always good to say yes. So I said, "Yes. What sport would you like me to play?" He said, "Well, we need a fullback for our soccer team." And basically, that was my start of my career in financial services. Um, I I had
How did a fullback in soccer team get you to finance work?
well, I took the job, and everything from then on has just been people bang on my door or I bang on their door. I've had an extraordinary career. I was a reinsurance clerk
I
in my
just want
first
to
job.
hold you there one moment.
Yeah,
What you just said, that everything in my life was about people banging on my door or I
yeah,
banging on their door. I think you
yeah.
said it in a very matter of fact way. But what I have realized in my own journey is that most of us actually don't do that. One,
Yeah.
we fail to respond to somebody knocking on door because many a times we don't even recognize that because of
Yeah.
our own insecurities. And two, we are too shy to bang on others' door too. So
And
you made
I
it a
share the
matter of
same.
fact, but I know it is
Yeah.
so different and it is not so matter of fact as you put it.
It is not easy. I'm not a naturally that social, but what I've learned is, yeah, the opportunity follows you. It finds you, and that's
But
been my career.
how do you keep
Yeah.
your antenna open for when the opportunity is following you?
The same way as you wrote to me, whatever it was last night, and said, "Let us do this."
Right.
And normally you wouldn't have written to me, and I would have been too busy.
Well, I can
We
sometimes
fixed
say
it.
that I
Yeah.
tend to do that too, but what I've seen is that most people don't do that.
No. Um, Look, and I have to tell you, um, I fell in love with India when I first went 15 years ago, simply because it was one of the few places on the planet I could do that, and people would open the door and listen. Um, when I wonder if I have a good idea and I want to take it to the US or to the UK or even in Australia, I have to go through 15 layers of incompetent administrators who are protecting the person at the top who last made a decision when they got out of the bath when they were 3. Um, the difference between countries is one of complacency. India is not complacent. One of the delights of being able to do the few things I've been able to do in India is the doors are always open, whether it's because I'm white, whether it's because
I
I'm
must say
articulate, I
that
don't know.
perhaps still has a element which I don't feel good about, but there is still some credence to it, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I've done nothing much in India. I've worked with my friend Pata on a project with helping Indian women to become more financially literate and have the benefits. I guess I inherited just by saying yes to my football team project. So it's basically what I've learned is optimism is shareable. Say yes and get out if it's wrong. I have a whole series of rules now. In my later life, I'm an investor in startups. And, in the world of startups, there are a lot of sharks. And you've got to be able to recognize when to say no. But I have, working rules for all of my projects. Some
I
are
would like
successful.
I'd like to spend a little more time on your startup investments and your rules for investments. So maybe, sorry, I interrupted with that.
It's okay.
So we'll just get back to your journey and we'll come back to.
Okay, so my journey was essentially I was 16. We had come out from England. We were economic migrants, and we had to do things. So I just worked. I was offered an opportunity for half a day off a week to go to study at Sydney Technical College. So I did a course in bookkeeping. This taught me somewhere in the middle of the second year, I understood the difference between a debit and credit. It took me about 18 months. And when I did that I was flying. I had the good fortune to be able to say yes. And Australia was just a place of opportunity then. I had a different job every 6 to 9 months. I could learn a job quickly. And I worked through property development, accounting, tax. I was Australia's youngest tax accountant. I qualified before I was 21, and on my 21st birthday, my application was in. So I may have been the equal first Australian tax agent. I worked in all sorts of spaces. I managed to pick up a degree in the history and philosophy of science, which informs much of what I talk about, which is essentially the idea of it's a European perspective, so it will be different from an Indian cultural history. But essentially, why do things happen? How have we moved from an Earth-centered universe, which was the dominant European perspective, which we've talked a little bit about before, to a sun-centered universe? And how has that been a trigger for what we might call European colonization, European industrialization, European optimism, European progress, with all of its positives and negatives? And those patterns prevail now. As we were talking the other day, forgive me, this notion we went from a horse and carriage to a petrol car to an electric car. They all transport people, but the businesses that were in the old segment never migrated to the new one. And while you can say the outcome was the same, and when we get to tokenization, it is a critical distinction. The thinking that got us to double entry bookkeeping,
Right.
is not what will win us through with single entry bookkeeping, which is basically what the blockchain and
I just
tokenization
want to
does.
take you 2 steps back.
Please.
Well, one thing is uh, you're having spent first 16 years of your life in UK.
Yeah.
That beneficial for you when you went to Australia, though you started off perhaps in uh, the lowest kind of job that you may have had to start with. But can you put together few things as what actually worked for you as an advantage, having come from a continental Europe? Okay, today UK is not part of EU, but
yeah, it was. It was, first of all, it was free. There was a thing called Australia wanted English migrants, and my parents cost them £10. They were called £10 POMs, and that was an attempt by Australia to bait people with English backgrounds.
why
My back.
that?
Australia didn't have much of a population. As far as I can work out now, that the population of Mumbai and the population of Australia are pretty much the same.
As of today?
Yeah, 26 million in Australia, and I understand Mumbai is somewhere between 23 and 26 million.
Yep.
So Australia needed migrants. It always has needed migrants, has always flourished with migrants. And at that stage, they wanted to bring across English speaking. My parents, so we're a Jewish family. We had come out from Europe and they had grown up in Ireland. So we are part of, I guess, a Lithuanian to Ireland, to England, to Australia. We are economic and political migrants. At each stage, we moved with nothing. My father was a great role model. He was a failed entrepreneur, which is what you need to do when you're traveling. Vast majority of entrepreneurs are not successful. I inherited some of the traits, and what I discovered is it's a sequence problem, not an inherent problem, if I can explain. If you can get the first 2 or 3 bits of your entrepreneurship right, then the failed bits get covered over. If you get the first 2 bits wrong, you never recover, if that makes sense. And in finance, and particularly when you're doing a drawing down out of a portfolio, it's the initial sequence risk.
But how long did you take to consider becoming an entrepreneur?
I didn't consider it. In Australia, we have this thing called attention deficit disorder, ADHD. Have you come across it?
I have.
Yeah. So attention deficit disorder is basically, there's another good idea. Let me follow that. So whenever I took a job, I was quick enough to learn it, and then I got bored. And there was always another job. Now, I did that for the first, till 1991. So I did that for 20 years. And I went through corporate very quickly. By the time I had left, I had set up and been the inaugural general manager for 2 businesses in Australia, for international business. I'd set up a life insurance company. I could barely spell life insurance, but I'd learned early, just say yes. And I set up a life insurance company for a Bankers Trust of New York, which at that stage had moved to Sydney and was the dominant fund manager in Australia after the 87 crash. And I have been headhunted from that.
Was your UK background helpful in you?
Not in the slightest. No? Nothing. No, I don't think so. I think it was just simply I was positive. I was reasonably bright, and I could see the patterns. And I don't know what to make of it, but I worked for a property developer, for instance, and I was the accountant for 20 failed companies. When the whole business collapsed, It was the biggest corporate collapse in Australian history.
Yeah.
It brought down a whole, and it didn't take long to see the pattern. You know, the property developer borrowed against land. Bankers were happy to lend against some spurious definition. This is not bare land anymore. It's going to be a town or a city.
Mm-hmm.
The money was never spent on development. It was spent on earlier developments. It was like a spinning top.
Right.
Like a spinning top. Now, once you've lived through that, you've got a pattern. And I kept on seeing these patterns, and I continue now. So I don't think it was my English training. I went to a state school. I didn't finish high school. I started doing college because it was the only thing I could get into. I eventually got to university. And we were talking a little earlier, weren't we, about what is a good course to do. I did something that nobody in India, I would think, would do. I did a course in intellectual history. Nothing practical, nothing useful, but I spent 4 years at university just learning how to think.
No, I think that's amazing. I don't know what got you to. I'm okay. I'm just curious. What got you to do that? Why did you pick that?
I didn't pick it. It picked me. I went to university and said, I'm old to get to university. I'm really not. I've done accounting. I've been practical. I've made a living. I am going to enroll in things that interest me. And I turned up in the week before university, and I found somebody called John Saunders, who was sitting in the Faculty of Art, and he talked to me about cosmology. Okay. And I went, whoa, let me write this down. And I enrolled in Cosmology 101, whatever it might have been. And that was a faculty that I ended up with what you call a dominant stream in your BA. And I studied cosmology from lots of perspectives. I added to it and I subtracted. I enrolled in things and if I didn't like, I stopped. So I enrolled in psychology, found it really boring, but I stopped. I enrolled in sociology. Even worse, I lasted even a few hours in sociology. So it was a matter of finding the pattern that was in my head, if that makes sense. And I studied philosophy and history and economic history and German literature and drama. And it was just a background in patterns, if that makes sense. Because the patterns are of everything that is important. So when I talk about the blockchain, it is because I can see the pattern it's emerged from the industry I've worked in. I had no interest in the blockchain per se. I was as indifferent as 99% of people till somebody explained it to me. And I could see that it was a history of investment platforms. It was the next step. And I had worked on the first generation of platforms. I'd founded a software business that wrote the code for the first generation of platforms.
Yeah, just before you continue on that, generally what I've seen is most people who see their parents fail in entrepreneurship, when you typically refer to them as a failed entrepreneur, they seem to have a huge stigma against being an entrepreneur itself.
Yeah.
So in fact, my observation is that those people, last thing they would ever want to consider being is to think of doing something. They get so focused on financial stability, or rather stability per se.
Yeah.
So how did you break out of that?
I was too selfish.
Was it that easy?
Well, the answer is, look, I have 5 children. I've simply got going. I couldn't. I walked out of the corporate world to become an entrepreneur.
So you walked out of the secure paying nine
Yeah,
to five job to,
yeah.
and
I saw,
what was the trigger for that? I mean,
well, the trigger was
particularly you
twofold.
had a trigger from your past that that is the last thing you should want to be doing, right?
No, not at all. There was three triggers. I was working for this American organization in Sydney, and what you see is what I am. I bubble. I want to change things. I want to improve things. Anyway, I annoyed everybody. So in the last 6 months, nobody talked to me. So when I was in the office, I was founding and establishing a life insurance company for them, and that's a tortuous job. Working through the regulation. Because it was American, I had to deal with the Glass-Steagall Act on one side, which separates life companies from banks. And the Australian regulator's perspective was exactly the opposite. Oh. They wanted the life company to be supported by the bank. Okay. And I had to create the financial engineering to do that. So it was a slow job. And it seems I annoyed everybody. Anyway, I found myself at the end of it, there was a corporate reorganization, and I was unhappy with that. And then I went to see a film one Wednesday night, and it was called Awakenings. And it's a film with Robert De Niro. It takes place in New York in a mental asylum. And the patients, there's a wonder drug called L-Dopa. They take this wonder drug, and suddenly their world opens up. They're able to go.
What's the name of the movie?
Awakenings.
Awakenings. Oh, right. Yes.
And in this film, these people basically have severe autism or a form of encephalitis, I seem to remember. They're unable to communicate. The wonder drug enables them to go out and participate in the world, but it has side effects. And the moral of the story is we'll stop the wonder drug and bring them back because these people are dangerous. I saw that on the Wednesday. I went, this is me. I am in a mental asylum. There is a wonder drug. It's talking to people. Nobody is talking to me inside. By the Friday, I had my box with my things in it, and I was gone. So that was the trigger. So it was here. It wasn't any regret or anything from parents.
How difficult was it to explain this at home with your family?
My wife is understanding. Yeah. So what can I say?
I mean, did you tell her the same Awakenings thing?
Yeah. I think we saw the film together. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So what happened? What did I do? I decided I would call favors. I rang everybody I knew. And the usual thing happens. You never know whether it's you or your reputation. You know, I'd been very successful in my short career of setting up the asset management business and the life insurance. I was high profile because I talk a lot and I put things into context for people. That was still quite difficult then. And I was disappointed by so many people who said, yeah. Anyway, as luck would have it, one of my clients said, we need you for this project. And that got me going. From that, we set up software business and wrote the code for a platform. I was the product manager for that platform for 10 years, or what we'd now call it, the proposition manager. We did the legals for it, the training for it, the marketing for it. By then, I had made myself into a technical specialist. I understood tax and I understood some of the bit. I still don't know how to write code. And I don't even have a computer. I don't have a laptop. I just use an iPhone and an iPad to navigate the world. So if that puts it into context, and I picked up lots of clients. I became a consultant. And I designed retirement products. That was my specialty. for most of Australia's financial institutions over about a 10-year period. Yeah. Eventually, the big consulting firms came in, like KPMG and Pricewaterhouse, and could charge 50 times more than I could charge, but they went to the right school. And so I had to move on from that space. And so each stage has been sort of a crossroads, and then it doesn't work for a while. And sometimes it's for 2 or 3 years, and sometimes I have to sell my house, and the whole thing is chaotic. But we get on.
That's part of an entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. It's never easy, but the alternative, and that's what I mean by selfishness, there's so many opportunities to do good. There are so many opportunities to make the world a better place. And in the end, people find me to help do it. I don't have a better explanation. If you'd have asked me 8 weeks ago, would I be talking to you? No. Wouldn't. Stu and I were just working our way through a little project. But circumstances just fell into place.
So how did the working with Stuart come about? How did that happen?
So Stuart Erskine is my partner in this project, and all of my projects are partnerships. I've probably had 10 businesses, sold some, buried others. Stu came in. I had a business called Phenometrica, and my original business partner left the business, and I needed somebody to complement what I did and more do what Jeff did. And what Jeff was the product person, and I was the person on the stage. And so Stu came in, and what we needed to do was confirm the rigor of our science in risk profiling, that psychology space. As I told you, I walked out of my psychology course. I'm an applied psychologist, not a trained psychologist, if that makes the distinction.
But how did you connect with Steve? I mean, he's been UK based. So you kept
the same thing I did in India, I did in the UK. I went on walking tours. In Australia, we go on walkabout. You will have heard the term. I used to just go to places and run workshops. I did a chunk in India. You have to fly a bit because it's a big place. And I did that in the UK. Stu came to one of my workshops in London. There's a lovely hotel I stayed at in Leicester Square, if you've ever been to London. It's actually run by an Indian family, I later discovered. He came to my workshop, and I used to invite anybody that was in financial services, and they get an hour and a half or 2 hours of what you're asking now. I would just simply talk about what I thought was important. So the thing I had learned about business is that business that is valued is the present value of the future income stream.
Come again? Present value.
The present value of the future income stream of that business.
Stream, yeah.
Okay. So I'd learned this in multiple ways, but you can see it now in the valuation of SaaS businesses. A fast-growing SaaS business is infinitely more valuable than anything else. The closest thing to a SaaS business that existed before SaaS businesses was investment management. Investment management essentially lived or died by performance.
When you say
so if performance is bad, people take the money elsewhere. I had lived through the 87 crash. So here was I'd gone into Norwich to be the training manager. They'd recruited me. I knew, yeah, I just finished my dip ed, so I could say, yeah, I can train people. I was really trained for high school students, but it didn't really matter much because the intellectual level of the average person in financial services was really only year 10. It wasn't a profession then at all.
Okay.
It was very few university people worked in financial services. It was the actuaries, the people without personality do, but nobody else was there. And so doing training. So what I learned in the 87 crash was this. You need to be able to frame people's expectations. You should, nothing ever should be a surprise. And you hope to have earned enough goodwill for them to stay with you through the disappointment when it goes wrong.
All are easy said than done, right?
Yeah, and that's the journey I've been on since then. That's the journey. So the way we did it, we had appalling performance through the 87 crash. Absolutely appalling. And in fact, on the day of when we knew the market was going to crash, I went in to see my fund manager. And I said, Ian, what are we going to do? And he looked up and said, I don't know about you, but I am going to the local Indian restaurant for lunch. Yeah, it was called the Tandoor in Chapel Street in Melbourne. He went to the Tandoor for lunch. It was a very nice lunch. I was left with the mess. Okay, now the mess, this was all instinct. There was nothing that came from anything other than. I decided to put a capital guarantee on anything that Norwich had in the marketplace. And I managed to navigate that with my actuaries. They were keen to stay in business and to keep jobs. I went to a nil entry fee product with an exit fee to protect the value of the client. And I had navigated with the actuaries because they value new business in an insurance company on its lifetime value, not on the accounting. That form of accounting is just inappropriate for long-term businesses. And we sort of navigate it via goodwill when the thing is acquired, but it's done badly. The actuaries do it much more accurately because it's based on experience. So my stages were basically this. I used up all the Norwich reserves. We only had a very small amount to stand behind the guarantees. And then I said, let's sack the fund manager and let's put in the other fund manager so we can blame the fund manager and continue to get our remuneration from administration. So that was Australia's first corporate platform. Came out of that experience. What I started to understand was whatever I'd said in my documents framed people's expectations. If I didn't frame it, people reach their own conclusions. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a particularly profound thing. That's what brand does. Why do you spend more on a brand than you do something? It's because you see a value in that. That hasn't emerged by accident.
Oh, it's so important. A lot of startups don't understand this at all.
This was 87 crash, started the platform 91 after I'd walked out of Bankers Trust. We found ourselves a client, the credit union movement, and we did a joint venture together with a stockbroker. And I was the product manager, the proposition manager, and I then set up my consultancy. It was either limb of a consultancy. And deep down, I know you've got to keep on. You can't just stop. Jeff we started off as lunch partners. Everything happens by coffee or lunch in my world. And he put the proposition to me that we start Phenometrica. And I went, this is a chance for me to apply the psychological piece. Now, all the way to now, so 87 to whatever it is, it's almost 40 years, I think, is the same journey. The stuff that I'm doing with Stu, the stuff that I'm working on the blockchain, is the same journey. How do we frame people's financial affairs in a way that doesn't give them surprises, gives them a sense of control, and does so morally and ethically? And that's the journey. Now, the moral and ethics, I don't know. That just happens to be what I grew up with.
You ended up selling Phenometrica as well, right?
Yeah.
When was that? How did that come about?
2020, two stages of that. Jeff was older than me, and as you get older, when you get cantankerous. So we had a difference of opinion. And so Jeff wanted to sell, I didn't want to sell. So we did it in two stages. We did, the first stage was to link it across into a Canadian business called PlanPrompt, and PlanPrompt basically did the cash flow. So planning is really simply assets meeting liabilities as they fall due, and so you want to be able to project a portfolio against people's prospective liabilities, and you have a couple of variables in that you should take into account. Can they sleep at night with the possible volatility of that portfolio? And the second is, when all goes wrong and the market does go into correction and doesn't do as we did in 87, a down and an up. So if you measured it January to December, you wouldn't even see the correction. Sometimes you have a 1928-29 crash where it takes 20 years to come out of the cycle. That's called capacity for loss. So I merged Phenometrica with a business called PlanPrompt in Toronto, and Sean Brayman, the CEO, who's spent much time in India, we spent 2 years trying to put our philosophies were the same, but our technology was different. And we realized we couldn't do it. We were undercapitalized. And we decided we would sell the business. And we said we wanted to sell it to somebody that would continue to service both of our clients. That was a critical piece. And we elected Morningstar to be our purchaser. And after several months of due diligence, they dutifully bought the business. So in a sense, what I'm doing now is what I've been doing. That was the second time I had an asset liability tool. I built another one in Oz, but couldn't get traction for it. The institutions weren't interested, and the advisors, I think, was beyond their comprehension at the time, whereas now it is de rigueur, I think, this asset liability matching. And really what I'm doing is building on the blockchain. What's required for that?
Takeaways up to this journey?
Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
What are the biggest takeaways that you had, if you have to put it across, in 2-3 points to my audience or the listeners?
Always look to the future, but recognize that 98% of people will find you mad. Yeah.
So
and that's because of our personalities. So the stuff Stu and I have been working on is enriching the risk profiling side by bringing in psychological preferences. Something I wanted to do, even when we started Phenometrica, 94, 95, we said was things we were going to do. We're actually doing it now. We never could never get enough speed up in Phenometrica to do it. It is ironic we can bootstrap it now and do it. It is unbelievable. It took us 4 years to do our question set, build the platform.
I want to do this conversation on this, what you're doing now separately. So just to conclude this part of the conversation, I generally do like to ask about movies and books and podcasts that interest you. So you did talk about one movie of Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
So any other recommendations that you think has inspired you, and probably audience and listeners would find it as interesting?
So I need to admit a couple of things. As I've got older, my ADHD has got worse. So my core learning is from TikTok.
Okay. We don't have TikTok here.
So you are denied. Now you can see much of it on Instagram, but it's not, and you can see it in YouTube, but it's not. It's the level of style, I think, of TikTok that I like. So most of what I rely on is what I've learned. Okay, so the critical thing are 2 books, and they're quite old. One is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Now, Kahneman, for those of you who don't know, was an Israeli-American psychologist.
Died on behavioral economics, right?
Yeah, that's right. He was at Princeton in his latter years, and he got the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002 for his view of gains and losses, essentially, that a dollar lost or needs $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 gain to be the same emotionally.
You're the second person talking about David Kahneman on this podcast. In fact, I had a conversation with another behavioral economist from Germany.
Yes.
Rather, he lives in Switzerland. Very interesting, and that he actually runs a foundation which is to support death as a human right, to one's life as a human right. So he was telling me that he was inspired to get into behavioral economics because he came across his book, and that just got him into gone to do his PhD as well in that. So
so Kahneman, the book is terrible. It badly needs an edit, and I don't know anybody that's finished it. But
I have.
Did you?
In fact, he said that he actually got inspired so much that he went about doing his PhD in that. At the time, he didn't get a guide to guide him to do his behavioral economics PhD.
So the pieces that I'm left with from that is Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, the very title itself. And that is one of my guiding lights. And the guiding piece is this, and we will, if you don't mind, we'll role play it very quickly. Thinking fast is heuristic, intuitive. It's a shortcut. Thinking slow hurts. So if we just play this little game, this is a little maths game that I use. What is 3 times 20?
60.
What is 15 times 9?
135.
And what is 187 times 911?
I'll need a calculator.
Okay. So we have gone through what happens when it's in our, we know this, we do a little bit of work and then we give up. Now, what Kahneman
using my calculator, but not mental math.
So the way I see the world is this: when you're dealing with people, to survive, you have to be in system 1. You have to be able to pick up the nuances. You know, you live in this suburb, not this suburb. You drive this car, you send your kids to this school, you make these people. Most of that is Darwinian survival. I go to this temple, And your parents will say, don't mix with this people. They'll drag you down. You must meet these people. When you go off into system 2, it's lonely. Very hard. Because there isn't a community. Social media does some of that because it's turned a village into the globe, and you can find. I found those people on Twitter in my first thing, because Twitter was a publishing platform for people. So is TikTok. It's a publishing platform for the people that are grasping things, and that's what I've taken from that. The other book is called Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. Okay, so Geoffrey Moore talks about the technology adoption cycle.
Unfortunately, most people in the software business and sales and marketing within the software industry tend to regard that book very highly. But I think it's a good book for any business.
Any business. And so one of my business partners referred it to me. And basically, just to put into context, early adopters are different from everybody else.
Right.
Early adopters sell well to early adopters, and the chasm is, how do you get across to early mainstream? And the way Geoffrey Moore describes it is it's a psychological difference. Early adopters want to fix things. Early mainstream and laggards don't want anything to do with fixing anything.
Yeah.
They're managing their own immediacy. And getting across the chasm is hugely difficult. The way you do it, according to Moore, is you de-risk everything for the economic buyer in the mainstream. And you do that by providing complete solutions rather than, I have this great piece of software, but you will have to integrate it into your tech. Now, it takes me all the way back, but these things absolutely inform what I do. What I'm building with Stu is an integrated solution that will fit into the blockchain, into the identity token. And what we've done is we've brought it across the other side of the river into this last phase of the pre.
I want to talk a little more detail on that. So I would, okay, one last question on this stream of your journey.
Can I just say, there's one more book I need to tell you.
Yeah,
Robert Cialdini's book on influences. The benefit of reciprocity, which he talks about,
someone recommended, but I've not read that.
Persuasion, I think, is his book. But you must just have a quick look at it. The thing that I found inspiring is reciprocity is a powerful. I learned about it very quickly. I used to look at portfolios, and I used to call it the summer portfolio and the winter portfolio, the cricket and the football. Whoever had taken the advisor to either the cricket or the football found their funds in the client's portfolios the following week.
Okay.
That's the power of reciprocity. And so those are my 3 primary readers, all of them relatively straightforward, which inform what I do, plus my experience. Sorry, I needed just to complete that. None of them recent, none of them modern.
Yeah, I noticed that. Any podcasts do you follow?
Not in particular. I did my own podcast for about 4 years.
Oh, awesome. Is it still on?
I haven't done one since probably maybe 6 or 7 years. Essentially, I always find myself well too advanced for the rest of the world. I've got bored before anybody else has noticed things.
Maybe it's time to get back into podcasts, and we'll see if you could even collaborate on that.
It would be a delight. It would be a delight.
So wonderful. Okay, the last question I wanted to conclude this part with is, one, how much in your opinion or perspective, success or failure matters, because you also mentioned that in India you had a reception. Don't know if it is because you're white, right? So
Yeah.
how much, in your perspective, even now, the race, the skin color, right? Nationality, that you come from UK and or currently Australian, and three, even the faith for that matter. How much of an influence you think these three have? Because you've largely operator of Australia, but you've done business in Europe, also in North America, and a little bit in India, so technically Asia as well. So
Yeah.
so how much you think these three things contribute to or has an impact upon?
Yeah. I don't view it. There are two parts. My ambition to change the world and make it better takes me to all sorts of places. As a Jew, there's winners and losers. As somebody who didn't finish high school, there are winners and losers. As somebody with 5 children, you know, there's a big weight. I'm not sure. Now, I don't have any delusions of anything. When I first worked, I was employed to do something. When I gave up my job, my first question was, do I have any value, or was it just my employer? Was I just working with this great American organization or this long English company? And I had to prove to myself by saying, I wrote my first brochure, very English. I took a picture of a kitchen in the turn of the 20th century, showing people dressed up as if they were below a courtly house. The last thing I am is part of a hierarchy. I called it the Paul Resnik Consulting Group at the signing of the Magna Carta, 1492. All of it a lie. And my subtitle was, "We Say No More Often." Now, all I can put at, every time somebody comes to me with a problem or an area in which I could do something, I did it. I don't know what influence I have. Whether it's being white, I don't know. What I do know, I'm treated with great respect in some places and not others. But not much. I queue up like everybody else. If I wanted to speak to somebody so let me, quick story. In my analysis of a corporate structure in the UK, there's a business that's about to go under. I'm putting a proposition to them to save them, and they're telling me we can't make a decision till we're dead. Now, I bring nothing to that. They deep down know they're dead. I can't get through the barriers. Can't get through the barriers. Can't get to the decision maker. I can't mention the name, it would be unfortunate, but it's a blindingly obvious this is going to be a catastrophe for shareholders and staff and clients. Absolute dog's breakfast is the language we would use. I can do nothing to save them because they won't give me any avenue to get in.
And how do you think this will change in future?
Don't know. Once again, the people that are open, one of the things I'm doing in the psychology piece is understanding what we use the big 5 personality traits. One of them is openness to ideas. Early adopters have that. They have to. To survive, going back to Kahneman again, you need the intuitive stuff that says, oh no, we just behave like everybody else. So the classic is, Kodak. Yeah. If you're in Kodak, you don't want to find out about anything else. If you're in Ford, you go, whoa, no, we'll go electric, but gosh, we'll do it as a compromise. We won't do it as, we'll put the thing into the old business model, not run it separately. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Wonderful. In fact, uh, you mentioned about your first brochure design and signing of Magna Carta. And some time back, I was listening to something about the secret community, the Illuminati, right? And there was one of these conspiracy theories is that the Magna Carta was made to sign by the Illuminati, and what constitutes an Illuminati is part of it is also the people in the Zionist movement. So when that thought popped up in my head.
Yes.
I don't know you were mindful of it when you wrote it.
No. What I do know, though, I was lucky. In the course I did, we look at history and we look at theory, and nothing is ever what it seems on the surface. And whenever you go into something and say, this was an agreement between this country and this country, and you think, well, that was it. But there was 150 years of argument to get to that. And if it had happened the following day, it would have been different.
Well, actually, well, thank you so much. I think this conversation, I personally really enjoyed, and I hope our audience and listeners have equally enjoyed it. And I urge, just share it with who you think will appreciate this kind of a conversation and also enjoy this. And do come back, because we're going to talk about what Paul's busy with. You already got a idea of it, because time and again he talked about what they're doing in blockchain, though I tried to stop him to keep that for another conversation. So come back for that conversation, which is very interesting. And also we're going to, as a part of it, discuss what they're doing right now, and also try to get his perspective on what could be the challenges going forward in that space, and how, in his perspective, the future is going to be around that. So that is a part of the conversation next, and do come back. And until then, if you have not yet subscribed to Future Fast, do it right now and enjoy the ride. Paul, once again, thank you so much for just sharing your thoughts and for this conversation.
Andrew, thank you for digging into my brain and giving me good therapy. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.